Under the fractured moon, a mother's whisper wove lies into the cradle of winter's unforgiving arms. Alara's breath hung in the frozen air like a ghost reluctant to depart, each exhale a fragile defiance against the howling gale that swept through the jagged peaks of the Silverfang Mountains. She clutched the bundled infant to her chest. The child's warmth, the only ember in a world turned to ice. The rejection had come swift as a blade's kiss, not from words, but from the pack's turning eyes, cold, accusatory stares that branded her an outcast. Thorn, the Alpha King, whose mark she once bore with pride, had not spoken the decree himself. No, it was the elders, his council of shadowed loyalties, who had dragged her from the great hall of Eldridge Keep, their voices a chorus of betrayal under the blood moon's glow. "You carry shame in your womb," they had snarled, their claws grazing her arms as they bound her wrists with ropes woven from thorned vines. "The child is not his. The scent of our enemy clings to it like rot." Lies, half-truths, spun from whispers in the dark. Alara had never betrayed Thorn, not in body or soul, but the war with the rival pack from the shadowed valleys had sown doubt like poisoned seeds. A raid, a night of chaos, and her capture, brief, brutal, had twisted into rumor. She had returned bearing this life, conceived in the haze of captivity, the enemy's seed forced upon her in vengeance. Thorn's guilt had blinded him. He could not look upon her without seeing his failure to protect her. So he let them exile her, his silence a wound deeper than any claw. Now, the wind whipped her tattered cloak, the fabric, a once proud mantle of royal blue embroidered with the lunar crest of the Silverfang, torn and muddied from the forced march. Snowflakes stung her cheeks like accusations, melting into tears she refused to acknowledge. The path wound downward from the keep, a treacherous descent into the forsaken wilds, where omegas like her were left to the mercy of beasts and elements. Her bare feet, numb and bleeding from the sharp rocks hidden beneath the drifts, left crimson prints that the blizzard eagerly devoured. In her arms, the babe stirred, a soft whimper escaping its lips, muffled by the swaddling of rabbit fur she had scavenged from the journey. The symbol of her shattered bond weighed heavy against her throat, a silver locket, etched with the intertwined wolves of Thorn's lineage, now dulled by frost. Inside, a lock of his dark hair, pressed with a petal from the moonbloom flower they had shared under starlit vows. She had meant to cast it into the ravine, to sever the last tie, but her fingers trembled, unable to release it. The locket swung like a pendulum with each labored step, a cold reminder that love, once forged in fire, could freeze into something unrecognizable. The forest loomed ahead, ancient pines cloaked in white, their branches groaning under the storm's assault. Uives echoed from the depths, wolves perhaps, or the restless spirits of exiles past, calling her to join their eternal vigil. Alara's body ached, the labor of birth still fresh in her bones, a raw fire that the cold sought to extinguish. She had pretended, oh how she had pretended, through the swelling months, smiling through the court's suspicions, whispering affections to Thorn even as his gaze grew distant. "Our child," she had called it, weaving illusions of fidelity to shield them both from the truth's jagged edge. But pretense could not birth loyalty. It only delayed the fall. A distant rumble shook the ground, not thunder, but the tremor of hooves. Pursuers? The elders had warned of watchers to ensure she did not circle back, did not taint the pack's purity with her impure bloodline. Alara pressed on, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against the infant's tiny form. The child's eyes, when they fluttered open, were a startling silver, like polished moonlight on fresh snow, too much like Thorn's, yet shadowed by an unknown legacy. Would he have loved it, she wondered, if the truth had not poisoned the well? Or was his heart, scarred by the wars that claimed his kin, too brittle for such mercy? She stumbled into a clearing where the wind carved sculptures from the drifts, ethereal forms that danced in the moon's pale gaze. Kneeling, she pulled back the fur to check the babe, its skin flushed but alive, tiny fists clenching as if grasping for a world that had already forsaken them. "Hush, my little shadow," Alara murmured, her voice a threadbare lullaby lost to the gale. "We are not done yet." But doubt gnawed at her, a beast fiercer than any in these woods. What strength was there in a broken Omega, alone with a secret that could topple thrones? The locket caught the light then, a fleeting gleam that pierced the gloom, and for a moment she saw Thorn's face in its reflection. Haunted eyes, the weight of a crown forged from guilt and glory. He had known, hadn't he? In the quiet hours before the exile, when his hand lingered on her belly, a flicker of recognition in his touch. Yet he had let her go, perhaps to spare her the court's venom, or to bury his own shame beneath the snows of denial. As the storm raged on, Alara rose, the child's weight a anchor and a curse. The path ahead vanished into swirling white, promising only survival's cruel gamble. In the distance, a lone wolf's howl pierced the night, mournful and raw, as if the moon itself wept for choices unmade. She stepped forward, the blood from her feet staining the snow like offerings to forgotten gods, her spirit a fragile flame flickering against the encroaching dark. Redemption was no distant star. It was this moment. This pretense turned to perseverance, under a sky that watched without judgment. The wind's lament carved deeper into the night as Alara trudged through the veiled forest, each step a negotiation with the snow that clung like a shroud to her ankles. The infant's cries had softened to intermittent sighs, lulled by the rhythm of her heartbeat against its fragile form, but the cold seeped into her bones, a relentless thief stealing the last reserves of her strength. The silver locket at her throat felt heavier now, its chain a noose of memories, swaying with the gusts that tore at the pines. She paused beneath a colossal elder tree, its bark etched with runes half buried in frost, and leaned against it, gasping. The moon hung low, a fractured sentinel casting silver veins across the drifts, illuminating the path she could no longer discern. A snap echoed through the white silence, not the crack of a branch under snow, but something deliberate, predatory. Ilara's pulse quickened, her Omega instincts flaring like a struck flint. She clutched the babe tighter, scanning the shadows where the trees twisted into grotesque sentinels. Fear coiled in her gut, sharp as the thorns that had bound her wrists back at the keep. Pursuers from the pack? Or worse, scavengers from the shadowed valleys, drawn by the scent of vulnerability? She whispered a futile prayer to the goddess, her lips chapped and trembling, invoking the lunar light to shield what remained of her shattered world. From the gloom emerged a figure, staggering like a specter born of the storm itself. Broad shoulders cloaked in a mantle torn and bloodied, the fabric, once the deep indigo of royal decree, now ragged and frozen stiff. He moved with the grace of a wounded beast, one arm pressed to his side where crimson bloomed against the gray of his tunic, staining the snow in his wake like spilled ink from a fatal quill. His face, shadowed by a hood drawn low, bore the marks of battle, a fresh gash across his cheek, the metallic tang of blood mingling with the pine-scented air. But it was his eyes that pierced her, storm gray, haunted by the weight of unseen thrones, flickering with recognition as they met hers. Thorn, the Alpha King, her king, materializing from the myth she had tried to bury. Alara's breath caught, a sob trapped in her throat as instinct surged through her veins, a pull deeper than scent or sight, the ancient bond of marked souls refusing to yield to exile's decree. Yet denial crashed in its wake, hot and bitter as bile. He should not be here. He had let them cast her out, his silence a blade that severed more than flesh. Fear twisted with curiosity, a treacherous spark. Why now, in this forsaken wild, did fate mock her with his presence? She backed against the tree, the bark biting into her shoulders, the locket burning cold against her skin as if alive with accusation. He halted a few paces away, his breath ragged plumes in the frigid air, one hand outstretched, not in command, but in plea. "Ilara," he rasped, his voice a gravelly echo of the command that once filled great halls, now frayed by pain and something darker, a curse woven into his frame. Blood dripped from his fingers, pooling in the snow, and she caught the faint, acrid scent of silver-tipped arrows, poisons from the rival pack's arsenal, the same shadows that had claimed her in that fateful raid. He was in flight, hunted, his crown a target under the blood moon's indifferent gaze. "What madness brings you here?" she whispered, her words laced with venom born of betrayal, though her body betrayed her, leaning instinctively toward his warmth. The babe stirred, a tiny mule escaping, and Thorn's gaze dropped to the bundle, softening in a way that twisted her heart. He knew. Of course he knew. The silver eyes, the timing of her swelling belly during those war-torn months. She had pretended, weaving tales of their shared seed to cloak the enemy's violation. But his alpha senses, attuned to every nuance of her scent, had unraveled the lie long before the elder's verdict. And yet, he had loved her through it, or so his lingering touches in the shadowed alcoves suggested, a quiet devotion buried under layers of guilt and duty. I could not let them. He trailed off, wincing as he took a step closer, the snow crunching beneath his boots like brittle bones. The council's whispers turned to blades. A traitor among them sells secrets to the valleys, my blood for their ascension. His eyes, those eyes that had once devoured her under starlit canopies, now held a melancholy fracture, the weight of a king who bore the pack's sins as his own. The locket gleamed between them, catching the moonlight, a silent witness to vows stained by war's cruelty. Curiosity warred with the fear that rooted her in place. Why reveal himself now, wounded and exposed? Was this redemption, or another chain to bind her wandering spirit? The wind howled, carrying distant uevs, pursuers closing in perhaps, or the forest's own chorus mourning lost fates. Thorn extended his hand further, palm upturned, revealing a scar from their marking right, pale against his skin. The child. Our paths were never separate, even in deception. I knew, Ilara, and it changed nothing of what you are to me. She hesitated, the pull instinctive, a gravitational force drawing Omega to Alpha, but her mind rebelled, rationalizing the danger in his nearness. To yield was to invite more pain, to drag her secret deeper into the fray. Yet as another rumble shook the ground, hoofbeats, faint but inexorable, she felt the first thread of connection weave unbidden, born not of trust, but of the raw curiosity that survival demanded. Who was this broken king, fleeing his own shadows, if not a mirror to her exile? The storm pressed on, the moon's light fracturing across his bloodied form, and in that suspended breath, fear and wonder intertwined like lovers in the dark. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The snow-laden branches clawed at the sky as Ilara's hand found Thorn's, not in surrender, but in the desperate calculus of survival. His palm was fever-hot against her chilled skin, calloused from the hilt of swords and the reins of war, yet it anchored her as the distant thunder of hooves swelled into a predatory roar. She did not pull away. The instinct that bound them, frayed though it was, demanded alliance in this moment of peril. The babe in her arms let out a sharp cry, as if sensing the storm's turning tide, and Thorn's gaze flickered to the bundle, a shadow of tenderness crossing his blood-streaked face before resolve hardened it anew. "Come," he urged, his voice low and urgent, laced with the gravel of suppressed pain. He tugged her toward the denser thicket, where the pines huddled like conspirators against the gale. Ilara followed, her bare feet sinking into the drifts, each step a jolt of fire through her numb limbs. The locket bounced against her chest, its silver surface now smeared with flecks of his blood from where their hands had brushed, a crimson baptism sealing their uneasy pact. Why trust him? The question gnawed at her, a philosophical thorn amid the chaos. Was strength the iron will to stand alone, or the mercy of leaning into another's fracture? She had pretended love to shield her shame, but here, in the wild's indifferent embrace, pretense crumbled under the weight of necessity. They plunged deeper into the forest, the moon's fractured light dappling their path like scattered omens. Thorn moved with a limping grace, his wounded side leaving a sporadic trail of red that the snow greedily absorbed, each drop a silent accusation against the betrayers in his counsel. The traitor's hand guided those arrows, he murmured over his shoulder, his breath ragged plumes that mingled with hers. Silver from the valleys, poison meant for me, but it festers like the lies they fed you. Alara's heart clenched. She had borne those lies in the court's veiled glances, in the elders' snarls, all while cradling a life not of his making. He had known, loved her through the deception, yet let exile claim her. Was that protection or cowardice cloaked in duty? The hoofbeats grew louder, a relentless drumbeat echoing off the cliffs, accompanied by the guttural shouts of hunters, rival wolves from the shadowed valleys, allied now with the silver-fanged traitor. Arrows whistled through the air, one embedding in a trunk mere inches from Thorn's head, splintering bark into a spray of icy shards. He shoved Alara behind a fallen log, his body shielding hers and the child as he drew a dagger from his boot, its blade etched with lunar runes that gleamed faintly in the dim. "Stay low," he growled, his storm-gray eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that stirred the embers of their bond, unbidden and unwelcome. Fear twisted in her chest, but beneath it, curiosity bloomed. How could a king, marked by guilt's indelible ink, offer himself as bulwark to the very shame he had exiled? She crouched, the babe's warmth pressing against her like a fragile talisman, its silver eyes wide and unblinking in the gloom. The air thickened with the scent of pine sap and blood, the wind carrying the acrid bite of torch smoke as their pursuers closed in. Thorn lunged from cover, a blur of motion despite his wound, his dagger clashing against the first assailant's blade in a shower of sparks. The rival wolf, a hulking brute with valley markings scarred into his fur, snarled, his eyes gleaming with feral hunger. "The king falls tonight," he spat, "and the Omegas whelp with him." Alara's blood ran cold. They knew of the child, its tainted lineage a prize for their vengeance. Instinct surged through her, Omega fire igniting in her veins. She could not fight as he did, but she scrambled to a nearby outcrop, gathering loose stones slick with frost, hurling them with desperate precision. One struck the brute's shoulder, drawing a yelp that gave Thorn the opening to drive his dagger home. Crimson blooming across the snow like a rose unfurling in winter's grip. But more came. 3 shadows bursting from the tree line, their howls a chorus of betrayal that shook the ancient woods. Thorn staggered back, the poison sapping his strength, his free hand clutching the gash at his side. Ilara's mind raced. Flee alone, leave him to his fate, preserve the secret life in her arms, or bind their wounds in this shared peril, empathy forging what rejection had sought to shatter? She chose the latter, not from lingering love, but from the raw empathy of one exile recognizing another's. "Here," she called softly, spotting a crevice in the rock face, a narrow fissure leading to what might be a cavern, veiled by hanging icicles like nature's own portcullis. Thorn nodded, understanding flashing between them, wordless as the moon's pull. He dispatched another foe with a savage swipe, buying them precious seconds, then bolted toward her, scooping her up with an arm around her waist as if she weighed no more than the snow itself. The babe wailed as they squeezed into the darkness, the stones scraping their skin, the locket catching on jagged edges and tearing a shallow line across Alara's collarbone, blood welling, warm and vital, mingling with the chill. Inside, The cavern swallowed them whole, its depths echoing with the drip of melting ice and the muffled fury of the storm outside. Thorn collapsed against the wall, his chest heaving, while Alara knelt to tend him, ripping strips from her tattered cloak to bind his wound. Her fingers trembled as they brushed his skin, the contact electric, stirring memories of gentler nights under moonlit canopies. "Why did you come?" she whispered, her voice a thread in the velvet dark, the child's soft breaths the only counterpoint. He met her gaze, his eyes reflecting the faint glow of bioluminescent fungi clinging to the walls, ethereal blues and silvers that painted his face in otherworldly light. "Because exile was my failure, not yours," he replied, his hand covering hers on the makeshift bandage. The touch lingering, empathetic now, transforming fear into something tentative, profound. "I knew the truth of the child from the first scent of your return. Enemy's blood, yes, but your heart unchanged. I loved you through the pretense, Alara, because it was mercy you offered, not deceit." The words hung between them, a bridge over the chasm of betrayal as the locket rested between her breasts, its warmth a subtle pulse against the cold stone. Outside, the pursuers' voices faded, thwarted by the storm's renewed fury, but the bond within deepened, empathy weaving through their silences, turning strangers in exile into reluctant guardians of each other's scars. Yet doubt lingered in Alara's soul. Could this refuge heal what the world had rent asunder? Or was it merely a pause before the next unraveling? The cavern's shadows whispered of choices yet to come, the moon's distant light filtering through cracks like a promise veiled in uncertainty. The cavern's breath was a slow, rhythmic sigh, exhaling vapors from unseen depths where ancient waters pooled in forgotten veins of stone. Alara's fingers, stained with Thorn's blood and the faint iridescence of cave moss, lingered on the makeshift bandage she had tied around his torso. The air hung heavy with the metallic tang of his wound and the earthy dampness that clung to everything, a sanctuary forged from necessity rather than comfort. The babe slept now in the crook of her arm, its tiny chest rising and falling like a fragile bellows, oblivious to the shadows that pressed in from all sides. Thorn's storm-gray eyes watched her, not with the commanding fire of the king she had known, but with a vulnerability that cracked the armor of his guilt, revealing the man beneath, melancholic, etched by duties that had long since scarred his soul. She shifted against the rough wall, the locket at her throat catching on a jagged outcrop, sending a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the chill. Its silver surface, now flecked with dried crimson, seemed to pulse faintly in the dim glow of the fungi, as if absorbing the life's essence spilled around them. Alara had always dismissed the old tales of Omega gifts, those whispered legends of lunar blessings bestowed by the goddess, visions, healings, paths unveiled in moments of dire need. Her life had been one of pretense, a careful weaving of illusions to protect the fragile truth of her child's origins. But here, in this womb of rock and shadow, with Thorn's life ebbing before her, something stirred within her core, unbidden and insistent, like the moon tugging at hidden tides. "Why me?" she murmured, her voice a fragile echo in the vaulted silence, her gaze fixed on the bandage where fresh blood seeped through the cloth. It was not accusation, but a philosophical unraveling. What strength lay in mercy when the world demanded retribution? Thorn had known her secret, loved her through the veil of her deceptions, yet his silence during her exile had been a wound that festered deeper than any poison arrow. Now, as his hand covered hers again, warm despite the fever rising in his veins, empathy bloomed into something sharper, a connection that defied the rational barriers she had erected. "Because you see what others cannot," he replied, his words labored, each one pulled from a well of exhaustion. His free hand brushed the locket, fingers tracing its etched wolves with a reverence that made her breath hitch. The child. Its eyes hold the valley's shadow, but your light tempers it. I felt it even then, in the court's poisoned air. A destiny not of blood, but of choice. He winced, his body tensing as the silver poison coursed through him, twisting like thorns in his veins. The cavern seemed to narrow, the distant drip of water marking time like a heartbeat slowing to stillness. Alara's vision blurred, not from tears, but from a sudden heat blooming behind her eyes, a lunar fire igniting in her blood. The world tilted, the cavern's walls dissolving into veils of silver mist. She gasped, clutching the babe tighter as fragments of sight unfurled before her. Not memories, but revelations, threads of fate woven by the goddess's unseen hand. She saw Thorn as a young king, crowned under a blood moon, his first betrayal by a trusted beta who whispered lies to the elders. Then, the raid that had claimed her innocence, the enemy's brutal seed sown in vengeance, yet laced with a hidden prophecy. The child, silver-eyed and dual-souled, a bridge between packs, not a curse, but a key to ending the endless wars. The visions sharpened, pulling her deeper. She glimpsed the traitor in Thorn's council, a sly advisor with valley scents clinging to his robes, plotting under the guise of loyalty. His hand had loosed the poisoned arrows, not just to fell the king, but to claim the Omega's whelp as a trophy of conquest, twisting its mixed blood into a weapon of division. But beneath it all, a path gleamed, her gift, the Pathfinder's sight, dormant until this moment of shared peril, revealing choices that could redeem or doom them all. Mercy over vengeance, union over exile. The child's cry in her arms echoed as a clarion, its silver gaze locking onto hers in the vision, promising that rejection could forge unbreakable bonds. Alara's body trembled, the manifestation ripping through her like a storm's birth, sweat beading on her brow despite the cold. The locket burned against her skin, its chains seeming to tighten as if the wolves etched upon it came alive, their forms swirling in the air like smoke. Thorn's eyes widened, his alpha senses attuned to the shift in her scent, wild heather and moonlight, laced with power long suppressed. He pushed himself upright, ignoring the agony that flared in his side, his hand gripping her shoulder with a mix of awe and realization. Alara, the goddess speaks through you. I see it now, the path you light. You are no mere exile. You are the redeemer of my throne, the one who mends what war has torn. She pulled back slightly, the visions fading into echoes, leaving her drained yet alive with a profound clarity. The babe stirred, its tiny hand reaching toward Thorn, as if drawn by the same invisible thread. Fear lingered in her heart. What burden was this gift, to bear destinies not her own? Yet in Thorn's gaze, she saw not possession, but partnership, his guilt transforming into purpose. He had loved her through pretense, known the child's truth, and now understood her as the key, the pathfinder who could guide them from betrayal's labyrinth, choosing compassion over the crown's cold steel. The cavern's fungi pulsed brighter, casting their ethereal light across his face, illuminating the scars of battles past and the hope of those yet to come. Outside, the storm's howl softened to a mournful whisper, as if the moon itself acknowledged the revelation. But dilemmas loomed. Would she wield this sight for his redemption, or claim her freedom, letting the pack's wars consume themselves? The locket cooled against her chest, a symbol now of unveiled truths, its silver wolves watching as empathy deepened into destiny's forge. In that suspended breath, Alara felt the weight of choice settle upon her, a spiritual fire kindling amid the refuge's shadows, promising renascimento or ruin. Comment Luna if you'd walk through the storm for someone who saw your worth. The cavern's fragile peace shattered like thin ice under a heavy boot as dawn's pale fingers clawed through the fissures overhead, painting the stone walls in hues of bruised silver and ash. Alara's visions had ebbed, leaving her hollowed, the Pathfinder's gift, a double-edged flame that warmed her spirit even as it seared her resolve. Thorn slept fitfully beside her. His bandaged form slumped against the damp rock, the rise and fall of his chest a testament to the poison's reluctant retreat, eased perhaps by the lunar essence she had unwittingly channeled through her touch. The babe cooed softly in her lap, its silver eyes reflecting the faint glow of the fungi, innocent eyes that now carried the weight of prophecies unveiled. The locket at her throat hummed with residual heat, its etched wolves seeming to shift in the half-light, guardians awakened by her revelation. But refuge was illusion. The world beyond stirred with the inexorable pull of confrontation. Distant howls pierced the morning mist, silver-fang calls laced with urgency and betrayal, mingling with the guttural snarls of valley intruders. Alara's heart clenched, the moral crossroads looming like the jagged peaks outside, to flee into freedom's solitary wilds, claiming the child's untainted future, or to stand with Thorn, weaving forgiveness into the frayed tapestry of their bond, risking war's crimson tide for redemption's uncertain shore. What was love, if not the choice to heal wounds that might never close? She traced the locket's chain, its silver cool now against her fevered skin, a symbol demanding she confront the past that had exiled her. Thorn stirred, his storm-gray eyes opening to meet hers, shadowed by the melancholy of a king who had borne too many ghosts. "They come," he murmured, rising with a grimace, the dagger reclaimed in his grip. "The Council's traitor has rallied them, my pack, fractured by lies, and the rival alpha from the valleys, scenting weakness." His voice carried the ethical fracture of leadership, duty to his people warring with the personal ache of her nearness. Ilara nodded, bundling the child against her chest, the weight a reminder of deceptions past, the pretense of fidelity to shield this life, now revealed as destiny's bridge. He had known, loved her through the veil, yet his silence in the exile had been a choice of protection, or so he claimed. Could she forgive that, or would freedom's call prove stronger than the pull of shared scars? They emerged from the crevice into a world reborn in frost, the storm's fury spent, leaving a crystalline hush broken only by the crunch of snow underfoot. The forest clearing sprawled before them, transformed into a battlefield of white drifts scarred by last night's violence, arrow shafts protruding like broken teeth, bloodied patches frozen into ruby facets. Figures materialized from the tree line, a dozen silver-fang wolves, their pelts dusted with snow, eyes gleaming with conflicted loyalty. At their fore stood the traitor, Advisor Garrick, his once noble frame twisted by ambition, valley scents clinging to his fur like a lover's betrayal. Flanking him loomed the rival alpha, Kale, a massive brute from the shadowed valleys, his coat black as congealed night, eyes burning with the fire of old vendettas. The raid that had violated Ilara, sowing the child's seed, had been his decree, a weapon of war turned personal curse. "Thorn!" Garrick snarled, his voice oily with false deference, stepping forward with claws extended. "You've consorted with the tainted Omega, fleeing like a coward while the pack crumbles. The Elder's will was clear. Exile her shame, reclaim purity." His gaze slid to Ilara, venomous, lingering on the babe's swaddling. "That whelp carries my ally's blood. Hand it over, and perhaps mercy spares your throne." Kale's laugh rumbled like avalanche thunder, his massive form advancing, the air thickening with his dominant scent, musk and iron, a reminder of the night that had shattered her. Thorn positioned himself before her, his body a living shield, though weakness etched lines of pain across his brow. "Traitor," he growled, the word a blade honed by guilt's forge. "Your whispers poisoned the court, turning my silence into exile's decree. I knew the child's truth, valley blood forced upon her in your scheming raid, and loved her no less for it. She is no shame, she is salvation." The pack murmured, unease rippling through their ranks, the ethical dilemma cracking their unity. Loyalty to a flawed king, or the allure of Garrick's promises of untainted power. Alara's blood sang with the Pathfinder's fire, visions flickering at the edges of her sight, paths diverging like lunar rays on snow. She could run, vanish into the wilds with the child, embracing freedom's lonely embrace, leaving Thorn to his war-torn fate. Or step forward, her gift illuminating the traitor's web, choosing forgiveness for the pack's blinded souls over vengeance's sweet isolation. The locket burned against her skin, its wolves snarling silently as Kale lunged, his jaws snapping toward Thorn in a blur of fangs and fury. Thorn met him, dagger flashing, their clash a visceral storm of growls and blood spray, crimson arcs painting the snow like sacrificial runes. The pack hesitated, Garrick urging them onward with barked commands, but Alara's voice cut through, amplified by the gift's ethereal timbre. "See!" she cried, her eyes glowing silver as the visions projected outward, veils lifting for all to witness. Garrick's clandestine meetings in the valleys, his hand guiding Kale's raid not just for conquest, but to plant division's seed in her womb. Thorn's quiet vigils outside her exile chamber, his love a steadfast shadow amid the court's cruelty. The wolves faltered, whispers turning to snarls of outrage. One lunged at Garrick, tearing into his flank, the betrayal unraveling in a frenzy of claws and howls. Kale broke free from Thorn, wheeling toward Alara with murderous intent, his eyes fixed on the child, a trophy to twist into endless war. She stood her ground, the babe's cry a spiritual anchor, her hand clutching the locket as if drawing strength from its ancient pact. Thorn intercepted, driving his dagger into Kale's shoulder, but the rival Alpha swatted him aside, sending him sprawling into the drifts, blood blooming anew. Freedom tempted, flee now, while chaos reigned, but love's redemption called louder, a moral imperative forged in the fire of their shared pretense. With a surge of lunar will, Alara channeled the gift fully, her vision ensnaring Kale's mind, flashes of his own losses, the wars that orphaned his kin, mirroring Thorn's guilt, offering not death, but a path of reluctant truce. He staggered, confusion fracturing his rage, the brute's form trembling as empathy pierced his armored heart. "Enough," she whispered, stepping between them. The snow swirling like a goddess's veil. The pack turned on Garrick, subduing him in a tide of righteous fury, while Kale retreated, wounded in body and soul, the seeds of peace sown amid the blood. Thorn rose, leaning on her for support, his hand finding hers over the locket, their bond a quiet vow amid the settling chaos. Yet the choice lingered in her soul, a spiritual thorn. Forgiveness had averted war's abyss, but at what cost to her liberty? The moon's echo watched from the paling sky, the wolves' howls shifting from battle cries to mournful harmony as Alara pondered the weight of mercy, love's proof, not its prize, in a world still hungry for retribution. The locket gleamed, blood-flecked and unbroken, a symbol of dilemmas unresolved, pulling her toward a Renacimento, shadowed by the past's unyielding gaze. The snowfield stretched like a vast, unyielding canvas under the moon's waning gaze, its surface marred by the fresh scars of battle. Crimson blooms frozen into jagged crystals, the air thick with the coppery scent of spilled blood and the lingering musk of subdued foes. Alara stood at the clearing's heart, the babe cradled against her breast, its silver eyes wide and unblinking, as if absorbing the chaos that had nearly claimed them all. Thorn leaned heavily upon her shoulder, his breath ragged plumes in the crisp dawn air, the poison's grip loosened but not vanquished, leaving him a shadow of the king he had been. The pack encircled them now, their howls softened to a reverent murmur, Garrick bound in thorn vines at their feet, his treacherous form twitching in defeat. Kale had vanished into the shadowed tree line, his retreat a grudging echo of the visions Alara had thrust upon him, empathy's reluctant seed planted in the furrows of his vengeful soul. Yet victory tasted of ash on her tongue. The Pathfinder's gift a double bind that illuminated paths but demanded she walk one alone. The locket at her throat, bloodied and warm from the fray, pressed against her skin like a heartbeat not her own, its etched wolves a constellation of choices. Sacrifice the fragile peace for untrammeled freedom, heal the fractures of throne and heart through union, or let the wilds claim her and the child, severing the bonds that fate had so cruelly entwined. What was redemption, if not the alchemy of pain into purpose? She had pretended love to shield this life, woven illusions amid the court's venom, and Thorn had known, loved her through the veil, his guilt a silent vigil that now demanded reckoning. Freedom whispered from the windswept peaks, promising solitude's stark mercy, but his hand in hers, calloused and trembling, pulled with the gravity of shared exile. Thorn's storm-gray eyes met hers, etched with the melancholy of a ruler who had bartered his soul for duty's crown. "The pack looks to us now," he murmured, his voice a low rumble like distant thunder over the drifts. "But it is your choice that crowns or crushes. I exiled you not from disdain, but from the terror of losing you to their blades, knew the child's truth, the valley's shadow in its veins, and chose silence to spare you the pyre. Forgive that failing, Ilara, or go. Love is no chain, it is the mercy you taught me." His words hung in the frigid air, philosophical thorns piercing the armor of her doubt, the wind carrying faint youths from the horizon, echoes of wars that might yet reignite without her light. The pack shifted uneasily, their pelts dusted with frost, eyes flickering between loyalty and the allure of Garrick's shattered promises. One elder stepped forward, his muzzle grizzled with age, the lunar crest on his cloak glinting like a faded vow. "The Omega's sight has unveiled the rot," he intoned, voice gravelly with the weight of revelations. "But the child's blood mingles ours with the valley's. Bind it to the throne or let it wander, purity or peril." The question clawed at Ilara's core, a moral tempest. To sacrifice her autonomy, weaving the babe into the pack's tapestry as a symbol of reluctant unity, or claim healing through separation, curing her wounds in isolation's embrace. The locket seemed to thrum, its silver chain a tether to the man who had seen her worth amid deception, his ethical heart a mirror to her own fractured spirit. She glanced at the child, its tiny fist clutching the edge of her tattered cloak, silver gaze holding the dual legacy of violation and potential, a bridge, not a curse, as her visions had shown. Freedom tempted, a solitary path winding into the mist-shrouded wilds, where rejection could rebirth into self-forged strength, unburdened by thrones or pretenses. But union called deeper, a spiritual fire kindling in the space between them, promising to transmute guilt into grace, exile into alliance. Thorn's free hand brushed the babe's cheek, tenderness softening the lines of his pain-ravaged face. And in that touch, she saw the truth. He had loved not despite the lie, but through its necessity, his melancholy a canvas for her redemption. The wind rose, swirling snow into veils that danced like lunar spirits, the moon's pale light fracturing across the scene. A cinematic tableau of bloodied snow, armored forms, and eyes aglow with unspoken fates. Ilara's breath steadied, the Pathfinder's essence surging one final time, not in vision, but in clarity. Strength was not solitude's blade, but compassion's forge, choosing to heal what destiny had wounded. "We stay," she declared, her voice resonant, carrying the ethereal timbre of her gift, rippling through the pack like a benediction. Not as prisoner or prize, but as equals in this renascimento. The child binds us, not in blood's division, but in mercy's union. Forgive the past, Thorn, as I forgive your silence. Let us rebuild what war and whispers tore asunder. A collective sigh escaped the wolves, howls rising in harmonious affirmation, the air vibrating with the shift from despair to dawn. Thorn pulled her close, his lips brushing her temple in a vow sealed by the cold, the locket caught between them like a sacred relic, its warmth spreading through her veins as the poison's last tendrils faded from his blood. Garrick's final snarl dissolved into whimpers, dragged away by the elders for judgment, while scouts fanned out to seal the valley's borders, the seeds of truce taking root in Kael's retreating shadow. Ilara felt the weight lift, not entirely, but enough. Rejection's chains melting into the snow, love emerging not as reward, but as proof of souls entwined against the storm. As the sun crested the peaks, gilding the drifts in golden fire, they turned toward Eldridge Keep, the path ahead a winding ribbon of hope veiled in winter's hush. The babe's soft coo mingled with the wind's sigh, a lullaby of rebirth, while the locket gleamed unmarred, its wolves now symbols of unity forged in fire and frost. In this choice, Ilara found her spirit reborn, not unbroken, but mended, the ethical flame of compassion illuminating a destiny where every wound became a step toward the moon's eternal grace. The howls faded into the distance, a chorus of redemption echoing under the watchful sky, where pretense had yielded to truth and exile to enduring light. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe. Because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.